Love this podcast? Support it and sponsor today. Simply head to ozcastnetwork.com for details.
Welcome to Hong Kong Confidential. I'm Jules Hannaford and I'm your host. I'm an Australian woman and I've been living in Hong Kong for many years. I'm a mother, a teacher, an author, and I want to share my wisdom and the wisdom of others with you. Thanks for joining me and I hope you enjoy the show. The world is changing. Are you? The COVID-19 global pandemic has thrown us off track and changed our lives forever. But we know that in every crisis lies an opportunity for us to change and grow. Get ready to fast-track your change to the new normal. Master the New Normal, July 17th to the 19th, live streaming via Zoom. Learn new life concepts, practical tools for success and real-life satisfaction, meditation techniques to master your health, wealth, relationships, business and career in the new normal. Can't make it to the sessions? No problem. Recordings are available for purchase post-session. Watch them at your own convenience. Included in the VIP 3-day pass. VIP 3-day pass, US $99, 1-day pass, US $79. The promo code expires on the 10th of July 2020. Use the code MS10 to get 10% off. Register now at www.thegoldenspace.com/new normal. All sessions are non-religious and universal. No prior meditation experience is needed. Today I'm here with Simon Squibb. Hi Simon, thank you so much for joining me today. How are you?
I'm good. It's an absolute honour to be here. Thank you for inviting me on your podcast show.
For my listeners out there, Simon is an entrepreneur who's retired at the age of 42. How old are you?
I actually retired at 40. But
40? Oh my gosh.
I'm a little bit older now.
I'm so jealous. So that was amazing. And you used to live in Hong Kong for a number of years. So our connection is through Hong Kong.
Yeah. I lived there for 20 years. 20 years in England,
wow.
20 years in Asia, Hong Kong, yeah.
Awesome. Simon, tell me, what were you like as a child?
What was I like as a child? I have to think back. It feels like so long ago. It's funny when you ask a question like that because part of me sees pictures of yourself, you know? You see images of what you were like. And I think in pictures you always capture happy moments. So instantly I want to say I was a pretty happy kid. Had 3 brothers, 1 older, 2 younger. I think that came with its challenges. My older brother was always the strong one, the one I kind of looked up to, but frankly was a bit of a bully. And then the 2 younger ones, when you're sandwiched in the middle, I was number 2. There's an element of you need to create a lot of relationships with both sides of the equation. If the younger one is friends with the older one, you get picked on. So there was a lot of negotiations and a lot of fighting, as you'd expect from 4 boys. And my parents were very much like, you guys need to work it out amongst yourselves. And as 4 boys, what we ended up doing was fighting a lot. So I think in pictures, I always remember just, being happy. We had quite an interesting life. My parents were both quite flamboyant people. But I think equally at the same time, if I dig a little deeper into that question and ask myself, what was I like as a child? I think I was permanently in a state of survival, having to fight for your position in the family.
And do you think that served you well for them becoming an entrepreneur, like having to have those skills of fighting and keeping on your toes and negotiating and managing different people? Do you think that that's something that transferred into your adult life?
Yeah, I guess it all goes into the subconscious. I've got a child myself who's 2.5, so I've spent a lot of time understanding how it all works. But 0 to 7 years, there's a lot of subconscious learning, kind of your instinctive learning. So I think survival definitely got built in there. I think the biggest thing probably from my childhood was just my parents were both entrepreneurs. And so I guess watching them navigate the world is really what I learned the most. And I think fighting with my brothers is a bit like being in a company, perhaps, where you have to fight for your position within the company. So I kind of learned the politics of navigating all of that stuff from my childhood. But I think for me anyway, a lot of what I took into my entrepreneur life was a shock because my parents wanted me to be a lawyer. From as young as I can remember, maybe 8, 9, 10 years old, my parents would both be like, well, You explain things well, Simon. You'd be a good lawyer. And so that was kind of drummed into me. I accidentally became an entrepreneur, I think.
Did you suffer some sort of trauma in your childhood? I remember hearing you talk about this previously.
Yes, childhood's an interesting frame. When you say childhood, I always think like 6, 7, 8, 9. I was 15 years old when I think the major trauma happened to me. My father died suddenly of a heart attack. And that completely changed my life instantly. Almost within a week of him dying, I'd pretty much moved out of home because I fell out with my mother and I started a business. So it was quite a dramatic moment where suddenly being surrounded by 3 brothers and your mother and father to suddenly being on your own, starting a company in a very short period of time. But I see myself as a young adult at that point. To be honest, at that time, I thought I knew it all. So that's part of the reason I fell out with my mother. She was telling me what to do. And I was like, well, actually, I know exactly what to do. And I'm going to go start my own business and get my own home. And then I don't have to live under your rules because I know better. And so, yeah, that was quite a traumatic event, I guess.
And do you think that you moving out of home and starting your own business wouldn't have happened if your father hadn't passed away? Do you think that that was part of the motivation of you sort of needing to step up and be the man in the family and things like that? Or do you think it was a natural progression that might have happened anyway?
No, I think definitely that was the catalyst. Otherwise, I probably would have continued in school, although I hated school, if I'm being honest about it. I didn't enjoy school at all, but there didn't really seem any other option but to push through in school, especially if I was to be a lawyer, as my parents seemed to think was the right route for me. I think my parents, as they were both entrepreneurs, saw being a lawyer as a regular income, and to use your, I guess, skills in that world could be rewarding. Because they weren't lawyers, they thought that would be the perfect life for me. So I think if my father had survived a heart attack or hadn't had a heart attack at all, I would have probably ended up being a lawyer. I think the shock of losing my father and then moving out of home kind of created this need for income, partly, and a need for me to prove to my mother that I could survive without her and she was wrong and I was right. And so that drove me, I think, about starting my own business. And at the same time, I think I reviewed my father's life. You know, he was quite young when he died, around 56. And actually, when I analyzed his life, wanting to understand how things played out for him, he started quite late in life. He didn't really start being self-employed until he was in his 40s. He was in the RAF. So he was, in service to the country sort of set up, and then went and worked for a big corporation for a very long time. And then he got made redundant from that corporation and then started his own business. So I always felt when I looked at his life that he started too late in life. He started pushing himself, and working for yourself is hard work, and you have to travel a lot often, or you have to be away from your family a lot. It's not easy, and it took a toll on his health, but he started it too late in life, was my view when I reviewed his life. So that also spurred me on. I didn't want to, frankly, be 56 and working as hard as he was working. And he didn't have the time for himself or us because he was working so hard. So he didn't look after his health. And so I didn't want to be that way. I think so that drove me too. I didn't want to start too late. So I started maybe too young, you could argue. Decided, right, okay, look, not only am I going to prove my mother wrong and survive, I'm going to start a business now, not later, and not fall into the same trap that my father fell into of working for someone else only for them to discard you when it suits them. And maybe I took the wrong lessons or the right lessons, depending how you look at it, but I just didn't want to work for someone, so started a business on my own.
So it seems like you took the right lesson because you've been mostly successful. I know you've had some failures along the way, but you've been generally successful as an entrepreneur. But for a 15-year-old, having a fight with mum, moving out, saying I'm going to get a job, most kids would kind of move back after a week or two when they got hungry or they didn't have somewhere to sleep. What spurred you on? What gave you that tenacity to keep going?
I guess it's it's quite hard to explain. And I've never really been able to explain it well, but I'll try. I think there's an element of, I'm quite a stubborn person and I have quite a strong sense. Even at 15, I think I had this of what I think is wrong and right. And I like freedom. And I think that's a big trait for an entrepreneur, by the way. I don't want to be told what to do. I know what to do. I like to be taught. I like to be shown things. I like things to be explained. And I love debating with people about, different ways of doing things. Those things I love. I hate being told what to do. And I think that when my father passed away, my mother turned on full on, this is what you have to do. This is how you have to do it. And so I think that I couldn't live under that sort of a regime. Let's call it that. I think that my instinct was just to kind of fight back. And I think that took me 6 months to kind of not forgive my mum, but begin to say, well, I could communicate with her again. I mean, it was that bad at the beginning. It was really like her way or the highway. So I said, I'll take the highway. And then I had to go and build a car to drive on that highway and learn to drive. But I really enjoyed it. That was the weird thing. It was a really, really hard time and actually a really sad time. But equally at the same time, suddenly I got myself a crappy little room in a house in Cambridge where I grew up. And I suddenly started, this gardening company. And although, it was hard, I was having a lot of fun. Suddenly I was in the working world. I wasn't at school anymore. I wasn't under the control of my mother. And I was able to do things that I wanted to do. Now, I didn't party or anything like that. I wasn't that type of person, but I really enjoyed having that freedom and being in the world. And so part of me also, I guess it's like if I went to Disneyland for the day when I was 10, would I miss my parents if they just let me run off and enjoy Disneyland for the day? Probably not. Felt like that, to be honest, for the first year or two. I think I ran away from my problems in a way. I kind of got stuck into working and doing things. And I think it distracted me from the loneliness of my father not being there anymore or not seeing my brothers a lot. And of course, missing my mother, although I was angry with her. Of course, I'd have days when I'd miss her. But I think working hard kind of helped me escape all of that pain and focus in on...
Did that come back to haunt you later because you sort of had that separation from your family and you perhaps hadn't had the time to grieve? Did you find any time later in your life where maybe that was something that impacted you later on?
It's an interesting question. And to be honest, it's a complicated answer. I did grieve at the time. I grieved for my father. And I think for my mother, I just had a lot of anger. I was just frustrated at the way she was. And I'm sure she was frustrated with me too. You can imagine a 15-year-old, we're not the easiest of ages are. I think that over the years, basically happened in the first 10 years of my life is I put all that pain and all that stress in a box and I just built a business. That was my therapy, working on something for myself. And along the way, like you said earlier, I had some failures. I had to go get a job for a while to pay the bills in my company. And so I dipped in and out of working for someone, which, I learned a lot doing that. I didn't like working for someone else, but it was also interesting because there were points where I actually did like working for someone else. I was surprised, different people, different setups. But the point I'm making is I think it took me about 10 years to basically say, you know what, I need to forgive my mother. And in fact, as my life got more successful, I guess, I started to realize that in some respects, my mother had done me a favor. I mean, I don't think she did it to help me. She'll probably listen to this podcast and be a little bit annoyed. But, I'm telling the truth.
Mum.
Yes, sorry, Mum. But ironically, I did forgive her because I think about now a 15-year-old is so young, in a way she treated me badly. And I feel like in the end, though, it turned out well because by the time I was 25, I was independently wealthy. I was living in Hong Kong, starting a business that I loved called Fluid at that time. And I knew so much as people were coming out of university, wondering what to do with their lives. I was already totally focused on doing what I wanted to do and loving it. I was hiring those people that I could have been one of those people coming out of university, but I was hiring those people coming out of university. And here I was setting up a company in Hong Kong at 25 years old and loving life. And so I think at that point, I opened up the box of pain and kind of started talking to my mother again and almost said thank you to her. I still ever so often would grind my teeth about it because I don't think she did it to help me, but she still did me a favor by accident. I think she did it to try and control me, but in the end, it did me a favor. So I'm not sure I would necessarily kick my son out or encourage them to leave home at 15. But having said that, it did me a favor. It kind of pushed me. To answer your question, I feel like, it has come back to haunt me. I think I opened that box about 10 years later. By that time, I'm in Hong Kong. I've got a whole new life. I met my now wife around that age too in Hong Kong. And so, a whole new life took shape. And then when I retired at 40, that was when I think a lot of what this past issues with my life came to the forefront because I started to realize how much I'd missed my brothers, how we disconnected because of that moment, that fracture in time. I wanted to know even more about my father, but by that time it was too late. And so, I think in my 40s now, I definitely spend time thinking about how I could have done things better back then or how to deal with the pain now. And when I've got a little boy myself and I love him so much, I love my little boy so much, I don't want to make the same mistakes my parents made. I don't put any pressures on him, for example, to be anything other than what he is. I want him to discover who he is. I don't want him to be a lawyer because I'm self-employed and I want him to be a lawyer. I don't want him to be self-employed because I think being self-employed is good. I just want to know who he is. So I reflect on it as a parent more than anything now because I don't want to make the mistakes. I want to learn from the mistakes of my parents.
It's so interesting how having children can make us really reflect and sort of change our priorities. And it's interesting that you had a child around the time that you kind of retired or just after. Yep. So you would have been slowing down a bit as well. And so you had time to reflect on all of these things. So it does make sense. And the fact that we often think about our childhoods and our relationships with our parents when we become parents.
Yeah. And I think being a parent really does change things. And in part, that's why I retired. I mean, no one really retires anymore. I've got a podcast show, I'm writing a book, I'm mentoring people, and I'm doing all sorts of things. So retirement's a strange word, but I think for me, part of the reason that I decided to stop working so hard is learning from my father's mistake. My father basically worked so hard. He had 4 children, but he was working so hard and trying to manage having 4 children. And that created a lot of stress for him, I think. And so now my priority is my son, and everything else comes after that. And I feel that my son has a better life for it, and I have a better life for it. So I think that's why I kind of say I'm retired, because actually my priority is my son. The second is if I can do anything to help society or help people who want to start a business or help that 15-year-old me basically have an easier business experience, then I'll do it. But I want to learn from my parents' mistakes. And one of those mistakes my father made was having to work really hard when he had a big family. I wanted to do it the other way around. So that's why today I do take that time out.
Yeah, that completely makes sense. And it's really wise, I think. So tell me a bit about your very first business. What did you do? What business did you embark on and how did it go?
Well, it's interesting because I talk to people these days about, do a business with purpose and find purpose in what you do and make it about the purpose, not about making money. And I really believe that's true over the last 25, 30 years of doing business. That's what I've learned. The businesses that I've had purpose installed really kind of made me work harder and push myself and the business harder. But interestingly enough, when I first started out, I thought, okay, I need to come up with a good idea. What shall I do? And I thought, if I can come up with a good idea, I'll just start this little gardening company, because I can see where I live, there was lots of people with nice gardens and they weren't that well maintained. So I just thought to myself, well, until I find something good to do, I'll just go and see if those people want their gardens taken care of. Now, I've actually never done a hard day's work in my life. If you get to shake my hand one day, you'll see. And so doing gardening wasn't necessarily my skill set, but knocking on the door and saying, hey, I've got a gardening company. Would you like me to take care of your garden? And selling the idea was my forte. I was able to do that, confident 15-year-old that I was. So that's what I did. I just knocked on someone's door and said, hey, I'd like to take care of your garden because it's messy. And the first person said, no, we don't need it. So I was like, oh, okay. So then I thought, okay, it's not the reaction I was expecting. So I knocked on the second door just to test it. And then this person did say they needed it. And basically I knocked on 20 doors that day and 9 people said they did need someone to take care of their gardens. And I agreed a price with them. And basically that's what I started. And then I remember the first, a week later after I confirmed to everyone that we were going to do it, there was a lot of in between because I didn't have any equipment. I didn't have any money to buy the equipment. So I had to go back and knock on everyone's door again and get a 50% deposit. So I could then take that deposit money and go buy the equipment. And so that was funny. Even now I look back, these people must have laughed because this 15-year-old kid they're giving cash to, got no registered company, no brochure, no track record of taking care of anybody's garden. And they're giving me £100, £200 deposit. So it's just crazy to me when I look back, So anyway, then once I got the deposits, I was able to go buy the equipment. And I remember trying to rope a friend in to help me the first morning and they couldn't make it for whatever reason, schoolwork, something to do. So I went and did it myself and wow, it was so much work. I totally underestimated how much work it was to kind of clean up someone's garden and then what you do with all the stuff that you've kind of dug out the ground and all that. Anyway, I was supposed to do 3 people's houses this Saturday. I did 1 and I didn't do 1 very well, to be honest. So I remember kind of getting back to my crappy little room and sitting there thinking, wow, this is hard work. I was supposed to do 3 today. I've done 1 and done 1 badly. So, what to do? In the room I was renting, there was another 8 rooms in this house all being rented out. And one of them was a trucker. So he would work during the week and he was just complaining to me that he didn't have any money and was trying to figure out how to make some extra money. So I said to him, hey, why don't you take care of some gardens? Now I'll give you the work at the weekend so you can still do your trucking job during the week. And he said, sure, yeah, it's a bit of exercise. It's cheaper than going to the gym. So basically I hired him accidentally to start taking care of the gardens. And this guy knew how to work. I mean, he did 3 gardens in a day, no problem. He did it well. Basically, I just started hiring people to do the work for me. I was good at the sales and the management of the clients and even the roster stuff. I started getting quite good at that. And that's how it started. It was really because I was so useless at the thing I just sold, but I wanted to deliver on the thing I just sold that I had to get people in that knew what they were doing.
That is so hilarious that you did one day's work badly and then realized that you needed to become an entrepreneur and hire people and build your business immediately or it was going to crash and burn.
Yeah, well, exactly. Yeah.
Do you think because your parents were entrepreneurs, that helped you have the nous to know how to do that?
To be honest with you, I tell the story so simply, but the nous to do it came from doing it. It's a bit like playing a game. If you've never played a game, if you don't start playing, you can read the instructions all day long. You just have to kind of get on there and start playing it. I mean, I always remember like playing chess, for example. Someone can explain to you all the rules of chess. In a way, You know the basics. You start playing it, you make some mistakes, you start again, you play it again, you play someone good, they teach you. You know, it's basically like that. I don't think I had the nous. I don't think I was born an entrepreneur. I think everyone's born an entrepreneur, to be honest, though. But I wasn't necessarily categorized from day one as an entrepreneur. I made a load of mistakes at the beginning, and there was two choices for me at that point. I could give up and go back home, I guess, and live under communist rule.
Sorry, Mum. Again.
Or I could live free, and make this thing work. And so what happened, I guess, the psychology of it was I had the money coming in, and money solves all problems. You know, a lot of people don't focus on getting the money in. They focus on the idea, and then they don't have the resources or the capital to keep it going. I went the other way. I sold to a client. They'd given me the deposit. I had the money coming in, but I just didn't have the labor force to execute. And that's actually quite an easy problem to solve because people want money. And if, you know, this particular guy, he wanted to exercise as well, but didn't want to pay for the gym. So it was like a win-win. And once I realized what was his motivation and what he needed, money and exercise, and then I had a client that was willing to pay to get it done, the rest of it was just a question of hustle. I don't think it was taught to me by my parents. I think I was just reacting to the situation I was in.
Yeah, it's incredible that you were doing that as a 15, 16-year-old. So from there, were you like, okay, this is my path, I'm going to be in business? Or did you think I might go back to school, or maybe I'll do mature age entry to university when I'm 21? Or were you just then focused on becoming an entrepreneur?
Yeah, well, I think because you also don't realize how good you've got it. So there was a point about 6 months into the gardening business where I thought to myself, you know, I really like computers. And maybe, you know, I've got this gardening company, but I was only supposed to be doing this until I found something with meaning to do, something I really wanted to do. This was just, in my mind, a side project. So I went on a computer course and learned about coding. And then I saw a job advert for someone that was looking for someone who knew computers. So I think about 6 months in, I started to feel like, well, is this my future? I'm a gardening company owner. It didn't feel very glamorous when, especially if you start, I reconnected some of my friends and they're talking about the universities they're going to go to, and they're talking about the high-flying jobs they're going to have. And I started to have a slight inferiority complex where what I was doing wasn't that cool. It sounds cool now and it worked out well now. But at that time, 15, 16, you're starting to talk about people want to buy flashy cars and they start to want, you know, have these lives that they're going to have. And of course, people are living at home, their parents might be buying it for them and so on. So there was a part of me that was like, well, this gardening company is paying my bills, but it's not going to make me rich. So maybe I should get a job. Then I can have regular money coming in. So there was that moment where I thought, okay, that could be interesting. So I went on this computer course and found it really fascinating, coding and all that stuff, of course. And then I actually got a job. And for about 2 years, I did this job while having the gardening company on the side. And there was a moment where I basically, you know, the community within the company, it was really nice. And I had a regular amount of money coming in. And a bit of prestige began to build up, I guess, where I had this quite good job and this quite good company. At a young age, I was the computer whiz within the company, seen that way. And because I was entrepreneurial, I moved fast. And I guess the owners of the company liked that in me, a young entrepreneur working in the company kind of idea. They liked the fact I had a gardening company at the weekend. It all seemed pretty cool. In fact, this company had a big garden. I ended up having them as a client as well. So anyway, it was all pretty interesting. And then there was a downturn in the market and they had to lay people off and they made me redundant. And in a way, it was like a wake up because I think I could have easily fallen into a job. Although I had my own business, I started my own business young and I had that natural feeling of being an entrepreneur and I enjoyed it. There was also an element of I didn't realize that it was such a wonderful thing. It seemed quite limiting, in fact. And then when I got made redundant, I'm like, what am I doing? Why am I working for someone anyway? This is exactly what happened to my father. Now, history repeats itself if you're not careful, right? You go in, you work for someone, next thing you know, you were there for 10, 15 years and then they just let you go one day. So I was kind of lucky, actually, that they made me redundant. I look back now. Again, another lucky moment because I could have easily fallen into the system. I was very close to falling into the system.
Yeah, you were forced back into entrepreneurship, really, because you were made redundant. And also, it's like when somebody in Hong Kong put my rent up 48%. It was like, oh my gosh, I've got to buy a house.
Right.
I can't be in this situation.
Yeah,
and that pushed me to go and buy a property. So it's a similar thing.
Yeah, totally.
You were pushed back into entrepreneurship.
Yeah, this is why sometimes I say the things that are bad that happen in your life can actually end up being good. You know,
Yes.
like at the time being made redundant, I remember being very upset. I had relationships with everyone in the company and I actually enjoyed the work. And suddenly this family that I'd built up, this company that I'd worked for had actually become, a lot of those people become my friends, become my new family. And then suddenly it's all cut off. And I remember packing up my desk, walking out the door crying really, really upset. And so at the time, I certainly didn't think it was good luck. I thought it was bad luck. But then I kind of realized this is exactly what happened to my father. This is why I kind of had this whole rejection of the world in the first place, of going to work, going to university and going to work. And that, it was like a reminder. So I sometimes say maybe my father gave me a gift and put me on the redundancy list just to remind me, like, come on, get back to what you're meant to be doing, which is building your own vision, building your own mission, building your own dream. So then I went back. I went back to the gardening company. I played around with a few part-time jobs and a few things here and there. Again, the allure of working for someone's always there. Even if you're an entrepreneur, I don't care what any entrepreneur says, there's always that moment, especially in the early days, where you're like, it's quite stressful having to worry about cash flow and quite stressful having to worry about paying the bills every week. And there is something really appealing about just someone giving you money every month and you not having to worry about it. I guess it's a trick though, because I really believe that at some point people can just cut you. They have, not because they're evil, but because they have to. The economic situation of that company or the economic climate, like right now, for example, that people have to survive as businesses and they will cut people, even if you're good. I think that was the biggest shock for me. I was actually pretty good at my job and they had to cut me. It wasn't anything personal. And so, it just kind of reminded me of that. But I still kept dabbling for quite a few years with working for people. I worked in the hotel business for a while too. And I think I was searching for a community. So when I worked in the hotel business for a while, that was also a really nice community of people. It was like a family inside this hotel we worked for. And again, it distracted me from having my own business for a while. Maybe I was craving family. Maybe I was craving that connection. At the back of my mind, there's always this feeling like I had a million ideas all the time of businesses I could do. And I remember, I guess the turning point came when I was working in this hotel and the gardening company, I kind of let it go, to be honest. It became quite stressful. At points, I'd sold some of the contracts to other people because, I couldn't service them. So I sold them to gardening companies, made a bit of money here and there. It was just a side hustle, to be honest. And in the end, I made quite a bit of money out of it, but it was just a side hustle. And now I had these in and out of jobs and I was making money different ways, my own businesses and working for someone. And then I had this idea called Accommodation Express. And I noticed in the hotel business, back in the day, this is 30 years ago, folks, the hotels used to have people would ring up to book a hotel room. And the receptionist in our hotel was very well marketed because I was in charge of marketing. And we were full up. And the hotel would get a phone call from someone saying, I'd like to stay in the hotel tonight. And we'd say, sorry, we're completely full. And then we'd hang up, almost with pride that we'd sold out and sorry, you can't get a room here. See you later. And I saw that suddenly as a waste. And I said, well, instead of hanging up on that person, why don't we take their details? Because we've worked quite hard to get that lead. We've marketed the hotel globally. We've got a lead come in and we're just hanging up on them. Why don't we take their details and say to them, we are full, but why don't we try and find you somewhere to stay? And so that's what we started doing. And then basically realized a lot of the other hotels in the area didn't necessarily have the same good marketing. Well, they had rooms available. So I struck up a deal with those other hotels. And if we gave them our lead and it turned into a booking, we'd get 15%. So then we started doing that. And then it was funny because the receptionists started having these phone calls. Instead of just hanging up on them, they would start to take their details and then trying to find them another room. And I realized it wasn't going to work at the hotel reception because they were quite busy. They started to complain. They're like, Simon, I've got guests checking in. We are full, remember? That's why we're telling people to go away. And then we've got 300 odd people coming to stay tonight and I'm having to check them in while I also take all the details of the people so this isn't going to work. So I said, you know what? I'll make this a separate thing. I called Accommodation Express. And that's what I did. And again, I started building out this whole new thing. And it was actually very exciting. And then I guess I'm going into maybe too much detail. I don't know how much your listeners want to hear my whole story. But
no, this is great. I'm enthralled.
Yeah, again, this is the allure. And I don't know if this is a trap that a lot of people fall into. A long story short, the Accommodation Express business was really doing well. Of course, this was potentially the next lastminute.com or the future holiday booking service. It had huge potential. And we're starting to make quite good money from it, 15% bookings from hundreds of rooms, reallocating from the original hotel inquiry. And it was exciting. And then someone from Hong Kong asked me to come to Hong Kong and help them with their business. And they offered me quite a lot of money. Now, I didn't understand Hong Kong much at that point. I just thought to myself, I'm 23, 24 years old, around that sort of age at that time. And, why don't I have the experience of going to Hong Kong? This business I've got going, I can just leave with someone else to run. And why don't I take this opportunity and go to Hong Kong? So that's what I did. So I kind of left my business again and kind of went to work for someone kind of in a consultancy capacity in Hong Kong. And then when I got to Hong Kong, that's when I think I really woke up.
In what way? What do you mean?
I think up until that point, I'd still been living in well, I guess you call it a second tier city, but, not London. I'd living in Cambridge and Sydney and smaller towns. And I think suddenly I was exposed to this massive city and this huge opportunity. And the person I was working for used to pick me up in a beautiful Mercedes, and he lived in a beautiful apartment in Hong Kong. And he'd take me to this amazing office where he had hundreds of people working for him. And it was just kind of blew my mind a bit about the scale and the size of these opportunities and these things. And I think my business is up to that point. Maybe I think at the gardening company at one point, I had maybe 12 people working for me, which to me was massive. I think I just suddenly woke up to just how big things could be. Hong Kong kind of opened my eyes up to just the scale. I mean, you sit on the Hong Kong harbour and you look out and you're just like, it's just mind blowing. I just remember sitting on that harbour front, looking out, just thinking about the lives of all these people and how these buildings got built and how this city's just blew my mind. And that's when I think I really, really woke up as an entrepreneur. I'm like, right, I'm destined for something bigger. And then the person I was working for, they had basically quite an interesting business. I won't go into it now, but they had a problem with logistics, shipping. So it was, again, I saw an opportunity to help them with shipping. And my brother had a shipping company in Thailand. So long story short, I tried to make long story short, it's a very long story. I connected with my brother and we decided to team up together to start a courier company. And I went full in with my older brother on a courier company, and it did incredibly well. And I think from that point onwards, I never got another job with anybody else. I just completely focused on my own businesses and built 17 companies from scratch.
17?
17 companies. I built 17 companies from scratch now.
Wow.
No, these are not inherited businesses. These are not someone's given me a business. This is from scratch, 17 companies.
Why would you build so many?
Well, I didn't build them all at the same time.
Why wouldn't you be satisfied with just 6?
Frankly, just one after another. And sometimes one fed off another.
Okay.
So I had a business in Hong Kong called Fluid. And Fluid was an agency business. Absolutely loved it. I sold that business in 2016 to PwC, the accounts company. While building that business out, there was some flaws in the business. And that was that sometimes clients needed your services a lot and some months they didn't. So when we were quiet, we were like, okay, why don't we come up with our own products? So one of the products we came up with was something called coaster ads, which was adverts on coasters in bars and restaurants. And so up until that point, worldwide, the only coasters in bars really were the Heineken or Carlsberg beer mat coasters. And, we said, well, why don't we replace those with adverts and remove the Heineken and Carlsberg disgusting looking coasters and put cool, fun, interactive adverts on there.
How did that go?
Our first big client was United Airlines.
Oh.
They'd just gone into chapter 11 when they became our clients. They just cut all their big advertising in Fortune magazine and The Economist and all. And they wanted more cost-effective ways of getting their message out. So we basically, first campaign we did, they just launched flights to Chicago from Hong Kong. So we put coasters in bars in Chicago and we said, hey, take this coaster and you can get a free breakfast in Hong Kong. And then equally in Hong Kong, we put, you want a trip to Chicago and fill out this coaster and drop it in a box here and you'll be entered into a prize draw to get a free flight to Chicago.
How cool.
And we created this whole interactive ad system called Coaster Ads, which still exists today. That became one of the 17 companies. That wasn't an individual company. I still had Fluid, but then we started Coaster Ads. And when we started Coaster Ads, what that meant was we had to go talk to all the bars in Soho in Hong Kong. And there is in that south of Hollywood Road area, about 350 almost independent. A lot of them are now parts of groups, but back then a lot of independent restaurants, bars and shops. And when talking to all those restaurants, bars and shops, they were all talking about how they wanted to get a website and they wanted to go online. But as an individual outlet, building a website and going online was a big, expensive proposition. So again, we said, well, why don't we, Fluid, my agency, build a website for that area? So we built something called ilovesoho.com. And we put all those outlets on that website so that when you typed in a venue, it would come up and you'd have all the opening times and what they did and their uniqueness and so on in that portal. So that was another business that we created called I Love Soho. And then I Love Soho did so well that we ended up talking to the Siemens and doing kind of I Love Lang Kwai Fong.
Oh my
God. And I Love Lang Kwai Fong did so well, we ended up doing another business called I Love Knutsford Terrace.
Isn't that funny? So all these businesses kind of happened by accident.
Yeah, I guess part of it was driven by a high and low capacity in our agency business. So we had, I think during that time, about 60, 70 people in Fluid, and they would be really busy for a month and then really quiet for a month. So we'd go, well, we got a quiet month. Why don't we build a website for the area of Soho and those 300 plus outlets? We got a quiet month. Why don't we come up with this new way of marketing brands? So I think a lot of it was we were applying our entrepreneurial spirit to ourselves, really. And so when we had clients that we were servicing, that was fine. But when we had downtime, so we started a comic book, for example, which sounds crazy now, but we saw a gap in the market for a comic book. So we created a comic book. And I think once the creative agency allowed me to create a lot of businesses I had one core business, the creative agency in Hong Kong, which was profitable and successful and quite famous. And that allowed us to fund all these other activities.
And what were some of the greatest challenges that you faced when you had to manage all of these companies at the same time, or keep developing and manage different aspects of your life all at once?
I think there was two elements to that question for me. I mean, what springs to my mind when you ask it? One is the personal challenge. I think in Hong Kong, I remember going to Lang Kwai Fong, and this was when I was single, and, you're kind of chatting to someone you quite like, and there was this whole like, what do you do? And I was like, I'm an entrepreneur. And they were like, oh, almost disappointed. You're trying
they want a lawyer or a doctor.
Well, so she's like, well, where do you live? And I'm like, well, blah, blah, blah. Oh, you don't live on the peak? Or I still had that feeling from when I was younger too. An entrepreneur is inferior. And I had exactly the opposite feeling in my mind, like we're building something we own. This is exciting. We own it. This is our brand. We're in control of the mission and the vision, like that's how I felt about it. But in Hong Kong, it always felt like if I wasn't a banker with a big bonus expected at the end of the year, then I was an inferior person. And it used to frustrate the heck out of me. I'm talking like a girl I would meet. I would really like her. Because I was an entrepreneur, it was almost like to my detriment. So
Which is ironic because everybody else has got only a certain wage ceiling that they can earn in a job when they're working for someone else. But as an entrepreneur, your income can be infinite if you're successful.
Of course. Exactly.
But people don't get that because there's something superficial about Hong Kong itself, about the love of money and the way that some women are sort of driving towards status. An entrepreneur's not sexy enough and they don't really understand perhaps the potential for wealth. No. Maybe. I don't know.
Totally. Well, I mean, first of all, what's interesting is the truth is if anyone's, when you're younger, 24 years old at this time, I think this is before I met my now wife, I just remember feeling, of course, at the time, like, they've got the wrong mindset around what is success and what is failure. I love what I do. I'm building things. It's just so exciting. But to them, they're like, but how much are you earning? I never really cared. It was always about, let's do these ads on coasters and see, we'll change the ad market forever and we'll help brands get their name out there in a cost-effective way. And we'll get money to the venues for the first time because normally they just put the Carlsberg and Heineken coasters in the venues for free. So we're going to help a small business out. We're going to help brands out. We're going to do something fun and innovative that people will see and enjoy. And they did. We used to get a lot of funny emails and stuff from people that had seen the coasters. And it was just so much fun. Somewhere in between, we made money.
Yeah, but it wasn't the key factor. Yeah, that was a bonus.
But I did struggle with that, especially when I was interacting with people. When you're in the dating game, I guess this is why people buy themselves fancy cars and stuff like that. It's like a status thing because somehow back in that time, and I feel it's shifting now, but back in that time, being an entrepreneur was almost like, oh, you can't get a job. Like, no, I could get a job, but I choose not to. I'm like, yeah, Goldman Sachs isn't going to hire you, are they? You're not going to get through the 13th interview, are you? I don't want to work for these people. I've worked for people. I know what that's all about, but I want to be in control of my own destiny. And of course, at the beginning, when you're 24 years old and you're spending all the money you're making on building out a business, you can't spend all that money you're making on buying yourself a nice car or spending all that money you're making on going out to fancy restaurants. So I guess there's a lot of sacrifice in the early years.
Why can't you do that? Because you need to put it back into your business?
Well, exactly. As an entrepreneur in the early days, I mean, I now do that. I now have a nice house. And of course, we're in lockdown in London right now, so we're not going out anywhere. But I could eat anywhere I want. I can do anything I want. I can buy any car I want on the planet now. But the truth is I don't want any of those things now. But when you're younger, I think you do want those things. I think there's a real pressure for young people to, especially with Instagram and these things, to own all these things that make them look cool on Instagram. But I think they're missing the point that the real thing that you want to own in life is freedom. And what I had from a very young age is freedom. Freedom to fail, freedom to try things, and freedom to get excited about what I do every day, not about what I own. You asked me, what was the challenges? I think that was definitely on the personal level, a big challenge, especially when I went to Hong Kong. It really got worse when I went to Hong Kong.
Yeah.
You're right. In England, if you're an artist, there's some respect for that. Okay, you don't make money, but you love to paint. In London, there's still a banking culture, but in Hong Kong, it's like 10 times. It's definitely about prestige and your business card. If you've got a Goldman Sachs business card, somehow you've made it.
Absolutely.
I looked at it very differently. At that point, when I'm having those conversations with people, they're like, oh, you don't work for a bank? Oh, you must be broke. I was like, actually, they were right in a way. I wasn't super rich because all the money I had, I was just putting back into these ideas, putting back into the business. I was continually risking it all. And I was not thinking about what I could spend on myself. I was thinking about how I could save money, put it into the business ideas that I was trying to grow. And that paid off because that meant I could retire at 40.
Yeah, that's amazing.
But when you're 24 years old, having that discipline, and especially when you're getting peer pressure, and people are out having fancy dinners.
And you can't get a date because you've seen.
You feel like, there's interest
You're not
in
good
you.
enough.
People like your personality. And then there's an element of, oh, okay, you don't have any money, And I'm like, well, I do have money, but it's in my businesses. I own these businesses. And to be honest, that's why I think I ended up with a wonderful partner. I actually met my partner in Hong Kong. We have a little bit of a go at Hong Kong a bit, but I actually met my partner in Hong Kong. And I think I fell in love with her in part because she was not materialistic. She totally loved the fact that I was free. And in fact, we started the agency business together. And she was a talented designer who was destined to go and work for someone. She was very talented. She would have got very well paid. But I actually invested in her. I bought her a computer and said, actually, just be self-employed. And I think she loved that, energy of being an independent person and not going to work for someone else. And we fed off each other, because she had this skill in design and I had this skill in sales. And we said, well, why don't we start a company? I'll sell your design services. That's how our relationship began. And 20 years later, we're married with a little boy now. And it was just magical. But I feel like, in a way, it was good for me to resist that materialistic. There was a moment in me where I'm like, you know what? Instead of putting all this money I'm making into my logistics business, I'll just myself a nice car and drive around Lan Kwai Fong, and then people will take me seriously. But I resisted that because I knew that wasn't the right way to live. Continued to invest in businesses. And then when I saw Helen and what she could do, I invested in her, which was better than having a fancy car because that was the right way to do it. I invested in helping her. As opposed to putting up in a fancy car and telling her, look, I've got money. So anyway, I don't know if I've explained that very well to your listeners.
No, that's great. And I think there's something about, do you think being materialistic is innate? Because is it something that we learn or is cultural? I don't know, but I'm the same. I don't place much value in expensive things or clothes or designer things. I never have any desire to have expensive cars. And I wonder, what is it about us that makes us like that when other people place so much importance on materialism?
I guess there's an element of status. I think when you're younger, in particular, you want to prove something to people. I think I see it in my brother's son, who's 20 now. He's just bought himself a fancy car before coronavirus hit, because having a fancy car now is completely pointless. But there's an element
now he can't drive anywhere.
Well, exactly. But I told him not to do it. But, there's an element that he needs to do it himself and learn. And there's an element that is kind of like, look, I'm successful. And I feel like it's got worse with, as we mentioned earlier, with things like social media.
Absolutely.
And then there is an element of the celebrity culture, the MTV cribs kind of, this is the beginnings of it in my mind, look at my fancy house. What it should be is look at my career, look at how I got here. I enjoy my day to day. There should be more conversations around that. There should be this is what I enjoy, what I do.
Yeah, and look at who I'm helping and look at the difference I'm making in the world and look at the people that I'm mentoring and look at my heart and look at the way that I'm kind to others or I treat people well. All of these values are missing. Yeah, exactly.
But there's no Instagram for that.
It's all shifted.
I mean, I notice if I say I just mentored a really great founder and this is what they're doing, but if I put a picture up of, I've actually played around with this, because I find it fascinating. I played around with this. On TikTok, I played around with this. So I've got quite a big following on TikTok now, but one of the posts I did was, come and look at my £3 million house in the centre of London. And at the end of it, my point is that actually none of this makes you happy. Money doesn't make you happy. It only makes you happy if you're already happy. But I noticed the traction is much higher. If I start that way around and say, here's my £3 million house, come and have a look at it, and then make that message, it gets traction. But if I start with a message of, money doesn't make you happy, people are like, yeah. Of course, mate.
Shut up, you
say
rich
that you've got
bastard.
Money. Exactly. When I was poor, I was happy. And when I'm rich, I'm happy.
Yeah.
It just personifies who you already are. And I think that's the problem. A lot of people think that if they buy themselves a car or they buy themselves something fancy like clothes, it's going to make them happy. But it doesn't. It's just a temporary fix.
So what is the secret to happiness then, Simon?
My view is very simple. It's finding purpose. A purpose of life is a life with purpose. I feel like it's about, on a micro level, it's about enjoying your day to day. It's about feeling like what you're doing every day is rewarding and enjoyable, regardless of the money. If I was paid nothing, I am paid nothing to do my podcast show. I still do it.
Me too.
I love it.
I love it as well.
That's the key.
Yeah.
Money will come, or you'll find a way to pay the bills. It happens if you're not materialistic. Of course, you're not going to be able to pay the bills if you've got yourself a massive car loan and a house you can't afford and you bought all these clothes on credit cards. Yeah, and of course, you're going to have to go and do anything to pay the bills. But if you get rid of all that stuff, I'm not saying don't ever get it, because don't get me wrong, at points in my life, I've had a nice car. I've got not a bad car now, but I don't need those things.
And it's not your priority. Yeah.
No, it's not my priority. And I've only bought them because I have the money available. Like I don't need to put like my podcast show. I do invest in it, but it's never going to use up all my savings. I've made so much money from all my businesses now that I can justify it now. But I don't buy it to prove who I am. I still feel like the only thing I'd sell that car tomorrow if it meant someone said to me, right, you've got a car loan. That means you have to go get a job you don't love to pay it. I'd get rid of the car. I do not care about those things. And I think that's what people need to learn as young as possible. Because at 15, in a way, I had no choice. Because if I didn't make money and make the business work, I couldn't eat. There was no buying a fancy car. So I think I learned that early on. Actually, I enjoy doing these things.
Yeah.
And I think that building these businesses, I always wanted to have spare capital available to do like Accommodation Express. I was always ready to start a business, even when I was working for someone else. And I never bought a lot of fancy things because I wanted to keep as much capital free. By the way, this is why I tell people not to buy a house young, which people get very confused about, because a lot of people are like, well, shouldn't I buy a house? And then I've got an asset over time that goes up. And there's some truth to that. And we all know house values do go up over time. I mean, there's a couple of problems with buying a house when you're young. One is if you put the money into Amazon stock 15 years ago instead of a house, you'd have 10 times more money, maybe 20 times more money than you would from a house value going up. Second, buying a house ties you into a particular location. I think you should be very open to travel and doing things when you're young. And three, the banks are making the money from that whole transaction. Otherwise, they'd be buying the house. There's a part of me that warns people, don't buy a house for the sake of it. Keep the money free to do what you want every day. I mean, as in a purposeful job or a purposeful life. Once people get a mortgage and then they get a car loan, then they've got no choice but to do the job that they've got. They can't take a risk and start a business on the side. They don't have capital to start a side hustle.
That's very true. You can get trapped into having no option. You can get trapped into having to keep your job, to pay the bills, to pay for your car and your house and your children. But if you're free, then you can make different choices. Simon, tell me about your failures. Give me some examples of where things haven't worked. And how did that shape you? What did you learn from that?
I've had so many failures. It's just crazy. I always tell people that I've had a lot of success and I'm proud of those successes, but I learned very little from my successes because quite often I can attribute a lot of the success down to luck. But failure, on the other hand, I can pinpoint where it went wrong. And I can learn so many lessons from the failures that I don't get from my successes. But I can apply my failures to my successes. I have had successes because I failed. If I didn't have those failures, I wouldn't have success.
Yeah.
So I think for me, that's kind of the crux of it. And I've actually got loads on YouTube. I put up quite a lot of failures. I try to highlight them as number figures. I've lost $40 million on one business. I lost $2 million on another business. I've made serious business failures. And I think that the way I always look at these failures, as I say, is they're being amazing lessons. But people line, it's good to fail. People are like, why would I want to fail? I never set out to fail in these businesses. But an example, I started a comic book business, as I mentioned earlier, and I basically had the wrong partner in that business. And that was a big lesson for me, doing more diligence on the partner that I had and so on. Anyway, I started this business. We launched this comic book and I got into the business because I got very excited about this concept, which was basically a superhero story based out of India called the Mahabharata, which had never been told to the West before. And I thought to myself, if Superman had landed in India instead of in America, what would Superman stories be like? I just got a bit fascinated by that whole idea. But I went a bit too head in. I spent $1 million on building up this business. And then long story short, I had a meeting, myself, my wife, a guy called Ben Hall, who was the writer for the comic book. We were summoned by Harvey Weinstein to a meeting at the Grand Hyatt in Hong Kong because he was in town looking at making acquisitions of good products that he could turn into movies. And we got summoned and it was all very exciting. This is back when Harvey Weinstein we didn't know who he really was. And we just saw him, as I saw him when you Google him, as this guy that turns mega hit movies, Oscar winning movies. So we thought, wow, this is our big break and buy our comic book and we're going to have our comic book's going to turn into this smash hit DC Marvel comics kind of business. So we went and had this meeting with him we had a meeting with him and then we had a follow-up meeting. No, but I just remember walking into the penthouse at the Grand Hyatt. Anyone's ever been there? It's just a massive, massive overlooking the whole of Hong Kong. It's an amazing view. But we just walk in there and he's on the phone when we walk in there and his secretary's like, just sit here. He'll just be finishing up the phone call and then he'll come and talk to you. He's like, listen, Jessica, you're either in or you're out. If you don't do this movie, that's it. You'll never get a job in this town again. Send a message to Jessica Alba's agent and tell her, is he doing this for us? Or is this just happened? This is Jessica Alba who's talking to on the phone, like kind of shouting at her. We're like, wow, okay. again, at the time, in a way, you're impressed, right? Because these are very famous people and he's in control, right? But then, in fairness to him, I mean, I don't like him at all. Of course, I'd never want to see him again in my life. He was very respectful to me, my wife, and to Ben in that meeting. We told him what we were doing. He told us what he thought of it. It went really well. And we arranged a follow-up meeting. Anyway, it got to a point where basically we thought Harvey Weinstein was going to invest in this and turn it into a movie. And it was all very exciting. And anyway, the deal fell apart. And then from that moment, the whole business pretty much fell apart because without a movie deal, the cost of running a comic book and the amount of sales you get from comic books just doesn't justify it. Anyway, then my business partner in the business at that time turned out to be a crook. So we managed to get a deal done with NBC Universal, but then they never turned it into a movie. So basically it turned into a failure. I've still got the comic book today. I absolutely love it. It's still a beautiful product, beautifully illustrated, beautifully written, wonderful story. I still love it, but it didn't work as a business. It was a big financial failure. But I look back at the time, I was very disappointed that Harvey Weinstein didn't go ahead. But today I look back and I'm so grateful that I'm not in business with Harvey Weinstein anymore.
Yeah, I know.
I'm so grateful I didn't make my fortune or I was successful working with someone like that. So for what at the time was bad luck that it didn't happen, it didn't go ahead, all of these different elements. To me today, still hold the comic book with pride. I love the product and I'm glad I'm not in business with someone like that. Yes, I lost some money, but from that learning of having the wrong partner and maybe a bit of the wrong strategy, I applied myself better in the future enterprises. And that eventually meant that I had the right partners and the right structure and I succeeded.
So that story kind of speaks to your core values, really. And that was my next question. Like, what are your core values?
It's a good question.
You really hold on to in business and in life?
I think it's an interesting question because I think my core values, I've developed them over time. When I was younger, the core values, I mean, if anyone out there is listening, they're 15, 16, 17, 18 years old, thinking about your core values, I really recommend it. I didn't when I was younger. I literally just wanted beginning to eat. I just wanted to pay my bills and prove my mum wrong and survive. And then later, I wanted to build businesses that were clever and interesting and I found fun. And of course, I wanted to make money, but it wasn't my priority. But I think I'm going to call it moral code started to kick in as I started to realize my core values through these experiences with people that, like the person I went into partnership with the comic book business, they were in the finance business. And to them, everything was numbers. But to me, behind numbers is people. And so to him, it was all about, maybe I shouldn't say him in particular, but let's take the financial crisis, for example. A lot of the people that engineered that were just thinking about giving mortgages to people that couldn't afford it because they could get a higher amount of money out of the whole equation and sell more property and they would make more money. But they weren't thinking about those people and how they couldn't actually afford what they were giving them. And I think that maybe around 26, 27, 28, as I started to have these business dealings with these, I'm going to call it slightly morally corrupt people, I realized that my core values weren't aligned with these people. And that's how I discovered my own core values, like the things I wasn't willing to do. I was never willing to sell something I couldn't do. That's the thing. Back in the gardening company days, I realized that was there. The reason I had to get it done, even though I couldn't physically do the work, I wasn't capable. I promised people I would do it. So I felt like I had to get it done. And I think that stuck with me. I mean, I have shaken hands on massive deals with people. I don't need a bit of paper to reinforce that deal. I will follow through on it. My lawyer always says to me that paper will always accept ink. And to me, I shake hands with someone, I've done a deal with them, that's it. I'm going to do it. I'm shocked, I guess. You don't realize that not everyone's built the same. And it took me a long time to realize that if I shake hands with someone, they look me in the eye and they say, right, that's a deal done. That's not what they think. And I actually had this experience with my older brother. So even within my own family, the moral code isn't the same. I shook my brother's hand on this courier company we did together, 50-50. And then over time, I never checked the paperwork. I just believed we'd shook hands. It was very simple. We're in this together, right? Yeah, we're in this together, 50-50. Yes, shake hands. And my mistake was I didn't check the paperwork. I'd shaken hands with my brother on it. So I think even within families, I think people can have different moral codes. That shocked me. I think people can have different levels of expectations. And so I think my core values have developed over time and I figured out what they are now. Like I said, I would never sell something I can't do. I always respect honesty over everything else. I have these beliefs that transparency and all these things that maybe sound cliche and cheesy. I had someone, for example, work for me and then suddenly they stole a client and went and started their own business. It shocked me so much. They come to me and said, I don't want to work for someone. You know what it's like. I want to go work for myself. I would have helped them. And actually the client they stole, they would probably be better off servicing that client than me anyway, because they were the one that had a relationship with that client. No, I was just going to say what I would have wanted, I guess I envisaged with people was, we're a family. Yes, you're working for me. Come to me if you need to change that structure and I'll help you. But what did they do? They stole the client and set up a business on the side using my accountant, I might add. Those things shock me, because to me, it's like we're a family and I will help you. And if you want to start your own business, that's absolutely fine. But to kind of do it the way that that person did it, that completely goes against my transparency and honesty moral code.
And this is something that I've learned as I've gotten older, is that not everybody thinks and behaves the way that you do. And everybody doesn't have the same moral code. And so that's why we can't just trust blindly that everybody's going to behave the way that we do. So I think that's really what you're saying.
Yeah, but when you're younger, you don't know that, right?
No,
when
you
you're
don't.
Younger,
you have to learn
this assumption that everyone's the same as you, right? If you shake hands on a deal, you're going to do it. Of course, you've just shaken hands on it. Your reputation's on the line. That's what matters.
Yeah.
But that person doesn't necessarily have the same feeling. And that shocked me. Took me a long time to figure that out.
That's how I ended up getting scammed in an online dating romance scam, because I trusted that people were as good a person as I am. And I didn't realize that there are people out there that are out to get you or dupe you. So do you have any fears? Like, what are your greatest fears?
A fear is an interesting one. I think I fear repeating history. I fear repeating the same mistakes as my father. Even now, I still fear that. I love working so much. I can see sometimes that even with the podcast show that I'm doing now, I sometimes get really obsessed by it to a point where I realize I haven't exercised all day. Like there's just a danger that history repeats itself. So that's fearful. When you have a child, I'm always fearful of something happening to him. And I wish I could control that fear because it's sometimes ridiculous. Got to let go. But I'm always like, oh, don't fall over there. Oh, watch out that.
You want to protect them. And that still continues. My daughter's 30 and I still want to protect her and fix things. So it just continues. What's your attitude towards vulnerability and how important is it to be vulnerable? And can you be vulnerable as an entrepreneur?
Well, I guess this might come down to your moral code and your belief system, but I absolutely think I frame it differently. I call it sincerity. To me, it's about being sincere. And sometimes you're vulnerable and sometimes you're not. Sometimes you're not necessarily opening up and sharing your innermost fears, but you're being sincere. And I think vulnerability to me is a similar thing. Like even in this podcast, I'm telling you things. I'm desperately trying to be authentic about it and truthful about it. But it's a long time ago too. I'm trying to dig into those feelings while sharing those feelings. And so sometimes it can come across as, I believe you should do it this way, which is not necessarily vulnerable. But equally, I can tell you about what happened to me that maybe gives me those beliefs, which I think feed off each other. I like being vulnerable, but I think there's a time and place. I like to think I'm very vulnerable with my partner in life, which I think is the most important deal you ever do in your life, your partner. I like to be vulnerable with people that are vulnerable with me.
That's lovely. Thank you for saying that. I think that's absolutely beautiful. Do you have any heroes, or who is your hero and why?
It's a hard one. I think heroes is a big word. I guess there's people that I find interesting and I hope they turn out to be who they seem to be on the surface of it. And I think sometimes the more I get to know someone, sometimes the less I like them. I'll give you a crazy example. In 2000, when I started Fluid with my partner, we did bios on ourselves, like writing up. And part of our bio is like, who are our heroes? And I'm now so embarrassed to say this, but this just shows you how time changes everything. But when we did that bio, one of my heroes at that time was Donald Trump.
Oh my gosh, really?
Yeah.
Yes. So that does just show how it can change.
I tell you why. At that time, his story was, here was a person, he took risks, he did big businesses, he tried to do exciting, crazy things, and he lost it all, got back up, lost it all, got back up. Something I admired in that. I remember my wife still teases me about it now because I absolutely hate Donald Trump now.
I know. He's
and anyone
such
out there
idiot.
likes him, that's fine. That's up to you. But I just, everything he stands for, I'm the opposite. I don't think building walls,
agree.
I think take them down. But part of the reason I tell that is because thinking about heroes, I think they can change. And who springs to mind right now? And I'm just so nervous about saying it because history might prove me wrong. But of course, people like Elon Musk are interesting to me. Again, he's got a story where he's made so much money in the past, but he's gone again. He's trying to do amazing things, make the human race a 3-planet race, not living solely on Earth. I find that all amazing. And I'm very careful to watch the stuff that he says now, because if he starts saying things like, I hate Obama, I don't think he was born in this country, and I'd be so disappointed.
Yes.
I have hope that there are people out there that are just brilliant and good.
Yeah, exactly.
Maybe, I know he's a controversial one. I'm reluctant to say it too. Could Bill Gates be one of these people? Jury's out. Could he be there to help, taking his wealth and putting it into eradicating diseases and so on? Or is he part of the problem?
Yeah, good question.
So I think I'm really hesitant when someone asks me who's my heroes to really throw anyone out there. I mean, I'll be honest, kind of very emotional. My hero right now is my son.
Oh, that's lovely. Yeah.
I tell you why. Because he lives in the moment. He is happy. He just enjoys his life. If you play with him, he's happy. And, he teaches me things. He teaches me to play again.
Isn't that nice?
In a weird way, he's the one I can trust right now to put my bet on as a hero.
Oh,
jury's out on Elon Musk and Bill Gates, and definitely Donald Trump's off the list.
Anyway, just last couple of questions. First of all, tell me about the Good Luck Club podcast. What is it? How long's it been running? And who do you talk to? What do you do on this podcast?
So we basically talk to some of the world's most successful entrepreneurs and change makers, and we document their story, really. I mean, they tell us personal insight into how they made it, not the PR version, but how it really happened, a bit like I've done with you today, really telling the truth about the process, and that it's certainly not easy, and the struggles that they had, how they made it, really. And equally at the same time, the ultimate goal is twofold. One, download knowledge from successful entrepreneurs and give it to the next generation.
Yeah, that's
and
great.
Equally inspire people to start a business of their own, which I think is very relevant right now with such high unemployment. Don't sit around waiting for someone to give you a job. Go out there and make a job for yourself. And so I want people to feel inspired.
And what advice would you give to somebody who was going to start their own business or wanted to be an entrepreneur?
I can only draw my own experience that basically sometimes you just need to start something. Some people will spend so much time wanting the killer idea or, incredibly purposeful from day one. You can build purpose over time. I think sometimes it's like I did with my gardening company. Okay, I'll start this until I know what I want to do. And at least you're learning about how to build a business. So when you're younger, I definitely recommend that. When you get older, I would probably frame it differently and say you don't have so much time to make so many mistakes. So, maybe you do need to plan it out a little bit more. And hopefully by that time, if you're older, you've got experience anyway, so to leverage that experience. So my experience has always been sales and marketing. So I've managed to carry that through all my businesses. That's the theme in all of them. I can carry that skill over. And I think for a lot of people, they just don't start. That's the biggest mistake. They just spend too long thinking and talking and not doing. And I do think that's the key.
And can you start a business without money?
100%. I've got a video on YouTube about how to do that, actually. I put up there basically 5 ways to start a business without any money. And there's plenty of ways to do it. In my view, starting a business with no money is actually a better way to start a business than with money. And the reason I say that is when you don't have money, you're much more inventive. You're much more creative. And I think that ultimately leads to innovation. Whereas if you've got money, you just plow it into something and hope that it eventually works. Whereas if you don't have money and it's not working, you have to change. You have to adapt. You have to evolve. And so therefore, having no money, in fact, even the podcast, I never, I've got the money to put a lot of money into it, but I don't. I still keep it lean because I want to be innovative around it. I want to see what works. I want to play around with it. I'm not just throwing money at Facebook ads, and that's why I want to make the content get traction. So I act like I've got no money and keep working on making the content better.
And is it going well?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I enjoy it. I think
that's the main thing.
That's step one for all of these things that I do. Do I enjoy it? And I do enjoy it. I've been an entrepreneur for 30 years. I learned so much from talking to these people.
I learned so much too. And do you know what? That's something that I didn't really think about when I started this podcast. I wanted to help others. I wanted to do something creative. I wanted to give back to the community. And what I really didn't realize is how much I was going to learn from all of the guests that I have on my show and how it would change my life. Like it really has changed my life. And I absolutely love it.
Yeah, totally. I can relate. And I think for me, I wasn't expecting necessarily to learn because I feel like I'm quite an experienced entrepreneur and, I'm telling other people how to do it. So but when I sit down and listen to these other people's stories, I learned something. And so I enjoy it. I've learned something. But then is it successful? Probably the metric around what I would like it to reach more people. I think it's good content. We've now done 22 podcasts. I can see the downloads. I think we're about 50,000 downloads, which isn't a small number, but in the big picture of an 8 billion people planet, I'd love more people to hear it because I think the content in there can really help people. So as far as a metric is concerned, an external metric, I definitely think we could do better in getting more people to listen to it. And that's something I'm working on. But I mean, ultimately, I do gauge around, do I enjoy it? And I think therefore it's a success right now.
Me too. And I think that really is kind of like the summary of what makes something successful, as if you enjoy it. Would you agree?
I think so, yeah. And then if you can install purpose as a second level, then I'm good. That's the holy grail.
Awesome. So, Simon, thank you so much for talking to me today. It's been an absolute pleasure and I've learnt so much. And we could probably talk for another 4 hours, but we're not going to. We're going to stop it there. And just the final question is, what are your hopes for the future?
Well, I hope that coronavirus brings some positive to people's lives, as crazy as that sounds. I think that a lot of people have had a chance to reflect, reassess what's important. And I sincerely hope that we come out the other end of this new normal. It sounds negative, but I think new normal could be positive.
I think you could be right.
My hope is that the new normal is better for people. People take care of themselves and each other more and care less about things and more about living in the now and enjoying what they've got instead of wanting more. That's kind of my hope for the future.
Brilliant. So, Simon, if any of my listeners wanted to get in touch with you for advice or any mentoring for a business or an idea that they have, how could they do that?
Just connect on my website, simonsquibb.com. You can also listen to my podcast show and content on how to help build businesses and so on via youtube.com/Simon Squibb. So yeah, if you want to reach out to me direct, go via my website. If you just want to listen to some more of my content, they can go to my YouTube channel.
Brilliant. And I'll put links in my show notes for all of that so my listeners can access it. So Simon, thank you so much for taking the time to talk to me today. I really appreciate it. And for my listeners out there, if this is something that you've really enjoyed and you think your friends and family would love it, please can you share it? And if you could go to iTunes to rate and review us, that will help the Good Luck Club podcast and Hong Kong Confidential go up the iTunes charts. And I'm going to now ask Simon 4 secret questions that I'm going to put on Patreon for my patrons. So for as little as $1 a month, you can go over to Patreon and sponsor Hong Kong Confidential, and you can hear Simon's answers to 4 secret questions. And you can also listen to the answers from my other guests for about the last 30 podcasts that I've done. So thanks again, Simon. That's the end of it here, and I'll see you over in Patreon. Thank you so much for coming on the show.
You meet someone online and there's this instant connection. It's amazing how much the two of you just seem to click. They live somewhere far away, and there's some plausible reason they can't travel to meet you. They tell you they're in love with you, and you feel optimistic for the first time in a long time. They have a successful career, yet somehow they need money from you to solve a short-term problem, always with the promise of paying you back. Time goes on and they need more money more urgently. You've started to see the cracks and begin to wonder whether they've been lying this whole time. All of a sudden it hits you. You've been scammed. Fool Me Twice is the story of my mother, Jules Hannaford, a woman who was drawn into the dangerous world of sweetheart scams. After a trip overseas to meet a stranger, a dangerous altercation in a Manchester hotel room, and thousands of pounds lost for good, she's here to tell her story. Fool Me Twice, a true crime podcast, is available on Apple Podcasts, Ozcast Network, and anywhere you listen to your podcasts.
So that brings us to the end of another Hong Kong Confidential podcast. I'm Jules Hannaford. Thanks for joining me, and I hope you'll be with me again next week. If you enjoyed today's podcast, please can you go to iTunes to rate and review it. I would really appreciate your feedback. You can email me at jules@hongkongconfidential.net, and you can find me on Facebook and Instagram at Hong Kong Confidential. If you'd like to hit me up on Twitter, it's at Jules Hannaford. I would love to hear from you.
Love this podcast? Support it and sponsor today. Simply head to ozcastnetwork.com for details.